My wife thought I'd beg after she cut off intimacy. Instead, I stopped chasing and left. After months of silence and coldness, Osiris received a text from Vera. No more intimacy, just accept it. He sat there, phone in hand, unable to believe what he had just read. But instead of begging like she expected, Osiris had a different plan. Everything had changed, and he was no longer the only one suffering in this relationship. What would happen next? Osiris's decision would make Vera reconsider everything completely. Before we continue the story, hit that subscribe button, like the video if you're excited for what's coming next, and leave a comment letting me know where you're watching from. Is it London, New York, or Cape Town? Now let's get back to Osiris and discover the shocking truth behind Vera's cold behavior. The sound of keys jingling against the front door echoed through the quiet house as Osiris Hampton pushed inside, loosening his tie after another demanding day analyzing data streams for the consulting firm. At 33, he had built a reputation as one of the most reliable data specialists in Chicago. But tonight, all he wanted was to come home to the warmth he once knew. The familiar scent of Vera's vanilla candles still lingered in the air, yet something felt different. The house carried an emptiness that seemed to grow deeper each evening, like a void expanding in slow motion. "Hey, babe," Osiris called out, setting his laptop bag by the entrance hall table. He could hear the soft murmur of the television from the living room, mixed with the gentle tapping of fingers against a phone screen. Walking toward the sound, he found Vera curled up on their gray sectional sofa, her auburn hair falling in waves around her shoulders as she scrolled through her phone with intense focus. She wore one of those new blouses he'd noticed her buying lately. Elegant, professional, the kind she never wore around the house before. When he approached to give her their usual evening embrace, she shifted slightly away, her body language creating an invisible barrier between them. "How was your day?" Osiris asked, settling into the armchair across from her instead of beside her on the couch. Vera's green eyes barely lifted from her screen, and when they did, they seemed to look through him rather than at him. Her response came in clipped, distracted syllables. "Fine, busy. You know how project management gets." The words felt rehearsed, like she'd been practicing this exact conversation. She used to tell him everything about her work, sharing stories about difficult clients and celebrating small victories together. Now her daily experiences seemed locked away behind a wall he couldn't penetrate. The memory of their early days together flooded his mind like a bittersweet movie reel. 8 years ago, they'd met during their final semester at Northwestern University, both ambitious and hungry for success. Vera had been pursuing her business degree while he finished his computer science program, and their late-night study sessions had turned into deep conversations about their dreams and futures. She used to laugh at his terrible jokes, steal his hoodies, and fall asleep against his shoulder during movie nights. Their wedding had been a small, intimate affair filled with promises and hopes that felt unbreakable at the time. But lately, those memories felt like they belonged to different people entirely. Vera's phone buzzed with notifications constantly, and she would glance at it with a small smile that never appeared when she looked at him. Her work schedule had become erratic, with late meetings and weekend conferences that seemed to multiply by the week. When he asked about her projects or offered to help with anything, she would give vague answers and change the subject. The woman who once shared every detail of her life with him had become a stranger sleeping in their bed. "I picked up dinner from that Thai place you like," Osiris mentioned, hoping to bridge the growing distance between them. "Green curry with extra vegetables, the way you always order it." Vera finally looked up, but her expression showed mild annoyance rather than appreciation. "I already ate," she said, returning her attention to the phone. "Had a working dinner with some colleagues to discuss the Henderson Project timeline." The Henderson Project was news to him, another detail of her life that had been carefully omitted from their conversations. As the evening wore on, Osiris found himself studying Vera's behavior with the same analytical mind he applied to his work. Every gesture, every glance, every subtle shift in her posture told a story he didn't want to believe. She had changed her phone's passcode, something she'd never bothered with before. Her laughter came easier when she was texting someone, creating a warmth in her face that had been absent from their interactions for months. When she finally headed upstairs to bed, she kissed his forehead with the mechanical affection of a routine rather than genuine feeling. Lying in bed that night, Osiris stared at the ceiling while Vera's breathing settled into the rhythm of sleep beside him. The woman he'd married, the one who used to curl against him and whisper about their future, now lay with her back turned, claiming her side of the bed like territory. Something fundamental had shifted in their relationship, and he couldn't pinpoint exactly when it had started or why. All he knew was that the distance between them felt wider than the few inches of mattress that separated their bodies, and it was growing larger every day. The next morning, while Vera showered, Osiris noticed her phone face down on the nightstand. Something else that was new. In their years together, she'd never been secretive about her device, often asking him to check messages or answer calls when her hands were full. Now, the phone felt like a locked vault containing parts of her life he wasn't allowed to access. When she emerged from the bathroom, wrapped in her terry cloth robe and humming softly to herself, she grabbed the phone immediately, checking messages with the urgency of someone expecting important news. That evening, while Vera was in the kitchen, Osiris noticed her phone charging on the counter. The screen lit up with a notification, and for just a moment, he caught sight of something that made his stomach drop. The message history had been completely cleared, showing no previous conversations despite her phone buzzing with activity all day long. Over the following weeks, Osiris found himself becoming an unwilling detective in his own home, cataloging changes that once would have seemed insignificant, but now formed a disturbing pattern. Vera's work schedule had transformed from predictable 9-to-5 days into a chaotic maze of extended hours and mysterious obligations. She would leave before dawn, claiming urgent client meetings, and return well past dinner time with stories about strategy sessions that seemed to multiply endlessly. Her explanations came too quickly, too polished, like presentations she had rehearsed in the car before walking through their front door. The woman who had once shared every mundane detail of her workday now spoke in corporate buzzwords and vague references to projects he'd never heard mentioned before. When Osiris tried to engage with specifics about her role as project manager, asking about timelines or client challenges the way he used to, Vera would deflect with phrases like, "It's complicated," or "You wouldn't find it interesting." Her phone had become an extension of her hand, buzzing with notifications that brought immediate smiles to her face, expressions of joy that had vanished from their personal interactions months ago. Most telling was her sudden interest in upgrading her professional wardrobe. Shopping bags from expensive boutiques appeared regularly, filled with sophisticated dresses, tailored blazers, and elegant accessories that remained hidden in their bedroom closet. When Osiris complimented a particularly striking navy dress she wore one morning, Vera's response was dismissive. "It's just something for client presentations." Yet these beautiful clothes never made appearances during their rare dinners together or weekend errands. They seemed reserved for a version of her life that existed entirely separate from their marriage. One Tuesday evening, Osiris attempted to bridge the growing chasm between them by suggesting intimacy, something that had once been natural and frequent in their relationship. He approached Vera as she prepared for bed, gently placing his hands on her shoulders and leaning in for a kiss that carried deeper intentions. Her reaction was swift and harsh, pushing him away with a force that shocked them both. "I'm not in the mood," she snapped, her voice carrying an edge of irritation that cut through him like ice. "I've had a long day, and I need space to decompress." The conversation that followed revealed layers of resentment that had been building beneath the surface of their polite coexistence. Vera spoke about feeling suffocated, needing room to grow professionally without having to explain every aspect of her career to him. She accused him of being clingy and possessive, questioning why he couldn't simply trust her judgment about what she needed. "I'm not the same person I was when we got married," she declared, her arms crossed defensively. "I'm building something important, and I need time to focus on that without having to manage your insecurities too." Osiris listened to her words with growing bewilderment, recognizing the voice but not the sentiment behind it. This was the same woman who used to call him her best friend, who had planned their future together with such enthusiasm and detail. Now she spoke about their marriage as if it were an obligation rather than a choice, something that competed with her ambitions instead of supporting them. The conversation ended with Vera retreating to the guest bedroom, claiming she needed better sleep to perform well at work the next day. In the following days, Osiris began noticing how Vera's mood would shift dramatically depending on who was contacting her. Text messages from certain numbers would transform her from distant and irritable to animated and engaged, her fingers flying across the keyboard with an energy that never appeared when she communicated with him. During their increasingly rare shared meals, she would place her phone face down on the table, but the constant buzzing created an underlying tension that made conversation feel forced and artificial. The name Caspian began appearing in Vera's casual mentions with suspicious frequency. Initially introduced as a new business partner she was collaborating with on strategic initiatives, Caspian quickly evolved from peripheral figure to central character in her work narratives. She would reference his insights during their brief conversations, quote his opinions on industry trends, and mention shared lunches and coffee meetings with an enthusiasm that contrasted sharply with her mechanical interactions at home. When Osiris asked about Caspian's role in her projects, Vera's responses were simultaneously detailed and evasive, painting him as both essential colleague and mysterious figure. Their weekends, once sacred time reserved for connection and relaxation, became another casualty of Vera's expanding professional demands. Saturday morning coffee dates were replaced by urgent conference calls that required her to sequester herself in the home office for hours. Sunday brunches gave way to networking events and industry workshops that always seemed to run longer than expected. When Osiris suggested they plan a simple dinner out or take a walk through their neighborhood like they used to, Vera would sigh with the exhaustion of someone being asked to climb a mountain. The physical distance between them had become measurable in ways that went beyond mere geography. Vera had claimed the guest bedroom permanently, citing her early morning schedule and need for uninterrupted rest. Their shared bathroom counter, once cluttered with both their toiletries in comfortable chaos, now displayed only his belongings. Her side had been cleared and reorganized, with her personal items relocated to the guest suite as if she were gradually moving out of their shared life one drawer at a time. Memory fragments of their happier times would surface unexpectedly, making the current reality even more painful by comparison. Osiris would remember how Vera used to steal his t-shirts for lazy Sunday mornings, how she would dance in the kitchen while making breakfast, how her laugh would fill their home with warmth and possibility. Those recollections felt like archaeological artifacts from a relationship that had been buried beneath layers of professional ambition and emotional withdrawal. As the month progressed, Osiris found himself questioning not just Vera's behavior, but his own perception of their marriage. Had he been blind to signs of her unhappiness? Was his desire for closeness truly the suffocating presence she described? The self-doubt crept in during quiet moments, making him wonder if his expectations were unreasonable or if her transformation was a natural evolution he should simply accept. Yet something deeper than logic told him that healthy relationships didn't require this level of secrecy and emotional distance. Late one evening, while Vera was supposedly reviewing project documents in the kitchen, Osiris passed by on his way to get water and caught a glimpse of her face illuminated by her phone screen. She was texting someone with a radiant smile he hadn't seen directed toward him in months, her eyes bright with genuine happiness, her expression soft and animated in a way that made his heart ache with recognition of what they had lost. The message arrived on a Thursday morning while Osiris was reviewing quarterly data reports at his home office. His phone chimed with the distinctive sound of Vera's text notifications, but when he glanced at the screen, the words seemed to rearrange themselves before his eyes like a puzzle he couldn't solve. No more intimacy, just accept it. The message was blunt, clinical, devoid of any explanation or invitation for discussion. It read like a corporate memo announcing policy changes rather than communication between married partners who had once promised to navigate life's challenges together. Osiris stared at the text for several minutes, his analytical mind struggling to process the finality of those 7 words. This wasn't a request for space or a temporary boundary. It was a unilateral declaration ending a fundamental aspect of their marriage. He found himself waiting for a follow-up message, perhaps an explanation or even an apology for the harsh delivery, but his phone remained silent. Vera had made her decision and apparently considered the matter closed, requiring nothing from him except compliance with her new terms. The expected response would have been immediate and emotional, calling her, demanding explanations, or pleading for reconsideration. 6 months ago, Osiris might have driven to her office to have the conversation face-to-face, desperate to understand what had gone so wrong between them. But something had shifted in his perspective during those weeks of observing her gradual withdrawal from their life together. Instead of panic or desperation, he felt an unexpected sense of clarity wash over him. The message wasn't a surprise so much as a confirmation of what he had already begun to understand about the state of their relationship. Rather than responding immediately, Osiris closed his laptop and sat in the quiet of his office, allowing the full weight of Vera's decision to settle around him like dust after an earthquake. For the first time in months, he wasn't trying to decode her behavior or find ways to reconnect with someone who had clearly decided to disconnect from him. The constant effort to bridge their growing distance suddenly seemed not just futile but unnecessary. If Vera wanted to end their physical relationship without discussion or negotiation, perhaps it was time to stop fighting for something she no longer valued. That evening, when Vera returned from another extended workday, she seemed to expect some form of confrontation or emotional outburst about her morning message. She moved through their house with careful attention to his presence, watching for signs of the distress or pleading she had likely anticipated. Instead, Osiris greeted her with calm politeness, asking about her day with the same detached interest he might show a casual acquaintance. When she mentioned working late on project revisions, he simply nodded and returned to reading his book without further questioning or attempts to engage. The shift in his demeanor caught Vera off guard in ways that her withdrawal had never affected him. She seemed to hover in doorways, waiting for him to bring up her text or demand explanations about their relationship status. When those conversations never materialized, her confidence began showing cracks of uncertainty. She started mentioning work stress more frequently, as if providing justifications for behavior that no one was challenging. Her attempts to provoke responses through casual mentions of long meetings or weekend obligations fell flat against his newfound emotional distance. Over the following weeks, Osiris redirected his energy toward aspects of his life that had been neglected during his futile attempts to salvage their marriage. He rejoined the gym he had abandoned months earlier, finding satisfaction in physical challenges that provided clear feedback and measurable progress. Old friendships that had withered under the pressure of relationship troubles began to flourish again as he accepted invitations he had previously declined. His work performance improved dramatically when he could focus fully on data analysis instead of constantly worrying about Vera's mood or schedule. The transformation wasn't lost on Vera, who seemed increasingly uncomfortable with his newfound independence. She began making subtle attempts to re-engage his attention, mentioning problems at work that might normally have prompted his concern and support. When those tactics failed to restore the dynamics she had grown accustomed to, her behavior became more erratic. She would start conversations about their future plans, then abandon them mid-sentence when he responded with polite disinterest rather than the eager participation she remembered from earlier in their marriage. Friends and colleagues began commenting on the positive changes in Osiris's appearance and attitude. Marcus from his old basketball team mentioned how much more relaxed he seemed during their resumed weekly games. Sandra, his work supervisor, complimented his renewed focus during project meetings, noting that his contributions had become more insightful and confident. These external validations reinforced his growing understanding that the person he had become while trying to save his marriage wasn't necessarily the person he needed to be. One evening in late October, while Vera was taking a business call in the guest bedroom she now occupied full-time, Osiris overheard fragments of conversation that confirmed his worst suspicions. Her voice carried through the thin walls with an intimacy and warmth that had been absent from their interactions for nearly a year. She was laughing softly, using pet names and speaking in the affectionate tone that once belonged exclusively to their private moments together. When he heard her say, "I miss you too, Caspian," the final piece of their relationship puzzle clicked into place with devastating clarity. The revelation should have felt like betrayal or abandonment, but instead it brought an unexpected sense of relief. The distance, the secrecy, the gradual erosion of their connection finally had a concrete explanation that wasn't his fault or failure. Vera hadn't simply fallen out of love with him. She had fallen into love with someone else and lacked the courage to be honest about it. Her attempts to make their marriage intolerable were designed to force him into being the one to end things, absolving her of responsibility for the decision. For the first time since receiving her brutal text message, Osiris allowed himself to consider what his life might look like without the constant effort to maintain a relationship that existed only in his imagination. The thought wasn't frightening anymore. It was liberating. He began researching divorce attorneys during his lunch breaks, not out of anger or revenge, but from a practical understanding that their marriage had already ended in everything but legal documentation. That weekend, while Vera attended another mysterious work conference, Osiris began quietly organizing his financial documents and personal belongings, preparing for a conversation that would change both their lives forever. Though only he knew it was coming. The divorce attorney's office felt sterile and impersonal, with its beige walls and generic artwork that seemed designed to neutralize emotion rather than inspire it. Margaret Chen, a family law specialist recommended by his colleague, reviewed the documents Osiris had meticulously prepared over the past 2 weeks. His approach to ending his marriage reflected the same systematic thinking he applied to data analysis: thorough, logical, and stripped of unnecessary complications. Asset division calculations, mortgage considerations, and timeline projections filled a neat folder that represented 8 years of shared life reduced to financial transactions and legal procedures. Margaret's assessment was straightforward. Illinois was a no-fault divorce state, their assets were relatively simple to divide, and since they had no children, the process could proceed without extensive complications. Osiris listened to her explanations with the calm attention of someone making a business decision rather than dismantling a marriage. The emotional weight of the situation had lifted once he accepted that their relationship had already ended. What remained was simply paperwork to formalize what Vera had decided months ago through her actions and withdrawal. Finding a new apartment had been surprisingly easy, almost as if the universe was conspiring to support his decision to start fresh. A modern one-bedroom unit in Lincoln Park became available just as he began his search, complete with floor-to-ceiling windows and a view of the city that reminded him of possibilities rather than limitations. The lease signing felt like signing a declaration of independence from the suffocating atmosphere that his home had become. For the first time in months, he was making choices based on his own preferences, rather than trying to accommodate someone who had stopped considering his feelings entirely. The conversation with Vera needed to happen on neutral ground, away from the house where they had built so many memories that now felt tainted by deception. He suggested meeting at the coffee shop where they had spent countless Sunday mornings during happier times, but the irony of that location felt too heavy. Instead, he chose a quiet restaurant downtown, formal enough to keep emotions contained, but private enough for honest discussion. When he texted Vera asking for dinner together, her surprise was evident even through the digital medium. They hadn't shared a meal alone in weeks. She arrived 15 minutes late, apologizing about traffic while checking her phone with the habitual urgency that had become her signature gesture. Vera had dressed carefully for the occasion, wearing one of the elegant dresses from her new professional wardrobe, though her nervousness showed in the way she fidgeted with her jewelry and avoided direct eye contact. She seemed to sense that this wasn't a routine dinner invitation, but her attempts at casual conversation felt forced and brittle against the weight of what Osiris needed to say. "I've filed for divorce," he said quietly, after the server had taken their orders and left them alone at their corner table. The words emerged with a calm certainty that surprised them both. Vera's fork clattered against her plate, and for a moment, her carefully constructed composure cracked completely. Her face cycled through confusion, shock, and something that might have been relief before settling into defensive anger. This wasn't how she had scripted their relationship ending. She had expected him to remain in limbo indefinitely while she explored other options. "You can't be serious," she managed, her voice carrying a tremor that revealed how thoroughly his decisiveness had caught her off guard. "We haven't even tried counseling or working through whatever problems you think we have. This is completely out of nowhere, Osiris." Her attempt to portray his decision as impulsive fell flat when he calmly explained the attorney meetings, the apartment lease, and the careful planning that had preceded this moment. She had been so focused on managing her own secrets that she had failed to notice his systematic preparation for independence. Vera's tactics shifted rapidly from shock to manipulation, cycling through promises of change, accusations of abandonment, and appeals to their shared history. She spoke about working fewer hours, prioritizing their relationship, and addressing whatever communication issues had created distance between them. Her words came in desperate torrents, as if volume and speed could compensate for months of emotional absence and deception. But every promise felt hollow when measured against the reality of her behavior and the phone calls with Caspian that she still hadn't acknowledged. "I know about Caspian," Osiris said simply, watching her face drain of color as her elaborate explanations collapsed into silence. There was no accusation in his tone, no demand for confession or apology. He stated it as a fact that had already been incorporated into his decision-making process. Vera's mouth opened and closed without sound, her prepared defenses useless against his matter-of-fact acknowledgement of what she thought remained hidden. The relief of no longer having to pretend ignorance was almost as liberating as the decision to leave. The conversation that followed revealed layers of justification and rationalization that Vera had constructed to protect herself from the reality of her choices. She spoke about feeling trapped in their marriage, about discovering aspects of herself that didn't fit within their relationship, about professional opportunities that required different kinds of partnerships. Her explanations painted Caspian as both inevitable destiny and unfortunate complication, as if their affair was something that had happened to her rather than something she had chosen to pursue. Osiris listened without interruption, recognizing the familiar pattern of Vera taking responsibility for nothing while claiming victimhood in circumstances entirely of her own creation. The woman who had once been his closest confidant and strongest supporter had become someone who could look him in the eye while describing their marriage as a mistake she had finally found the courage to correct. Her ability to rewrite their shared history to justify her betrayal was both impressive and heartbreaking in its thoroughness. When she finally exhausted her explanations, Vera made one last attempt to control the narrative by suggesting they separate temporarily rather than divorce permanently. She painted a picture of time apart leading to eventual reconciliation, of lessons learned and relationships strengthened through adversity. But Osiris had moved far beyond the possibility of repair or recovery. The person who had sent that clinical text message about ending intimacy, who had systematically withdrawn from their life together, who had built an entire secret relationship while living in their home, was not someone he could trust with his future. "I'll be moved out this weekend," he told her as they prepared to leave the restaurant. "My attorney will contact yours about the paperwork." Vera's final appeal came as tears and promises that might have moved him 6 months earlier, but now felt like performance rather than genuine emotion. He had grieved the loss of their marriage during those long nights of gradually understanding that she was already gone. What remained was simply the administrative process of making their separation official. By Sunday evening, Osiris was arranging furniture in his new apartment, surrounded by boxes that contained only his belongings and none of the shared artifacts of a life that had ended long before either of them was ready to admit it. 3 months of solitude in his Lincoln Park apartment had taught Osiris more about himself than 8 years of marriage ever had. The morning sunlight streaming through his floor-to-ceiling windows created geometric patterns across the hardwood floors, and he found himself appreciating these small moments of beauty that had been invisible when his attention was consumed by relationship turmoil. His space reflected choices made entirely for his own comfort and aesthetic preferences: dark leather furniture, minimalist decor, and a workspace organized exactly as his methodical mind preferred it. Every corner of the apartment belonged to him alone, free from the compromises and negotiations that had defined his previous living situation. Professional success had followed personal clarity in ways that surprised even his analytical nature. The promotion to senior data specialist came with responsibilities he had always wanted but never felt confident enough to pursue while managing domestic chaos. His presentations to company executives carried newfound authority, and his recommendations influenced major strategic decisions that affected millions of dollars in client investments. Colleagues who had known him during his marriage commented on his increased focus and creative problem-solving abilities, though he never explained the personal transformation that had unlocked this professional growth. The gym had become his sanctuary for physical and mental renewal, replacing the destructive cycle of worry and analysis that had consumed his evenings for months. Weight training provided measurable progress that satisfied his data-driven mindset, while running offered meditative release from the intellectual demands of his career. His body had regained strength and definition that reflected his overall sense of reclaiming control over his life's direction. The confidence that came from physical fitness extended into every aspect of his daily interactions, from work meetings to casual conversations with neighbors. Vera's attempts at contact had evolved from desperate phone calls to carefully crafted text messages designed to elicit guilt or nostalgia. Her initial panic about his decisive departure had transformed into strategic manipulation, cycling through apologies for past behavior, updates about mutual friends, and subtle hints about her availability for reconciliation. Each message revealed her growing realization that the person she had taken for granted was no longer waiting patiently for her attention. Her communications felt increasingly hollow against the backdrop of his thriving independence, like echoes from a life he had already moved beyond. The divorce proceedings advanced with the efficiency Margaret Chen had predicted, each legal milestone marking another step away from the chaos that had defined his recent past. Asset division proceeded smoothly, since Vera seemed more interested in avoiding public details about their marriage's end than fighting for specific possessions. The house they had shared was being prepared for sale, with both parties eager to eliminate the financial and emotional ties that kept them connected. Soon, even the paperwork would be complete, leaving only memories of what had once felt like permanent partnership. Weekend afternoons that had previously been consumed by attempts to reconnect with an increasingly distant wife now belonged entirely to his own interests and curiosities. He rediscovered his passion for photography, exploring Chicago neighborhoods with his camera and capturing urban landscapes that told stories of change and resilience. Cooking became a creative outlet rather than a chore, with elaborate meals planned and executed for his own enjoyment rather than failed attempts to create romantic moments with someone who had already emotionally departed. The social isolation that had characterized his final months of marriage gradually gave way to renewed friendships and new connections. Former colleagues invited him to networking events where his confident demeanor attracted professional opportunities and personal conversations alike. The basketball games with Marcus had expanded into a broader social circle of men who appreciated his loyalty and straightforward communication style. These relationships developed naturally, without the artificial pressure of trying to compensate for romantic dysfunction at home. Sunday morning coffee runs had become rituals of peaceful solitude, but on this particular weekend, something unexpected interrupted his usual routine. The woman ahead of him in line at his neighborhood cafe was having trouble with her order, fumbling through her purse while apologizing to the barista for her confusion. When she turned around, flustered and embarrassed, Osiris found himself offering to help without calculating the social implications or potential complications. Their conversation began with practical assistance and evolved into genuine curiosity about each other's perspectives and experiences. Elena worked as a graphic designer for a nonprofit organization, and her passion for creative problem-solving resonated with his own analytical approach to challenges. She spoke about her work with infectious enthusiasm, describing projects that use visual communication to address social issues he had never considered from her artistic perspective. Their initial coffee conversation extended into a walk through the neighborhood, then an impromptu lunch that lasted well into the afternoon. For the first time in years, Osiris engaged with someone who seemed genuinely interested in his thoughts and experiences, rather than simply waiting for her turn to speak. The contrast between Elena's authentic presence and Vera's manufactured interactions was striking in ways that highlighted how thoroughly his previous relationship had deteriorated before its official end. Elena asked follow-up questions about his work, shared stories from her own career journey, and expressed opinions that sometimes challenged his assumptions in intellectually stimulating ways. Their conversation flowed with the natural rhythm of two people discovering compatibility rather than the forced politeness that had characterized his final months with Vera. As evening approached, they exchanged contact information with mutual interest in continuing their connection, though neither rushed to define what form that continuation might take. Osiris felt no pressure to immediately replace what he had lost with something new, but he appreciated the reminder that meaningful connections were possible with people who valued honesty and emotional availability. Elena represented possibility rather than solution, a glimpse of what relationships could offer when both participants chose to be present and authentic. Walking home through the tree-lined streets of Lincoln Park, Osiris reflected on the journey that had brought him from desperate attempts to save a failing marriage to comfortable solitude to unexpected new connections. The man who had once begged for attention from someone unwilling to provide it had become someone worthy of interest from people who appreciated his qualities. His transformation hadn't required dramatic gestures or radical personality changes. It had simply demanded the courage to stop accepting less than he deserved from the people in his life. The apartment that had initially felt like refuge from chaos now felt like foundation for whatever came next. His space, his schedule, his energy, and his emotional availability belonged to him again, ready to be shared with people who valued what he offered rather than taking it for granted. The future stretched ahead with possibilities he was finally ready to explore, no longer constrained by the limiting beliefs that had kept him trapped in a relationship that had ended long before either participant was willing to admit it. As Osiris prepared dinner for himself that evening, he smiled at the thought of Elena's laughter during their afternoon together, knowing that whatever developed between them would be built on the solid foundation of self-respect he had finally learned to maintain.